So the accusation centrally is that you have weakened this bill. It's not what you took to Parliament.
Something. In all humility, I would say that on this bill, I don't think there's been anybody more vocal than myself in the last 5 years in our country. At a point in time, you mentioned Sam George. The next thing that follows was LGBTQ. For the better part of the 5 years when we're doing this, Honorable Ntim Fordjour, I've always given him credit that he was the only MPP member of Parliament who was bold enough to sign the legislation. But his commentary was very muted because of the regime at the time. I hear him, and I had a very lengthy conversation with him yesterday, and I made the point very well known to him, my position on this. If we say we have a principle, let's stick to that principle. There are things we play politics with, and there are things we don't play politics with. It hurts me to say that Ntim Fordjour and a number of the NPP people who are speaking on this matter are simply playing politics. It's about trying to whitewash President Akufo-Addo's refusal to sign the bill and trying to make excuses for him. They had always believed and thought that the NDC was not committed to signing this bill or passing this bill and getting it before the president. This whole agitation is political. And let me explain why I say it's political. The bill that myself and Ntim Fordjour sent to Parliament in Clause 9 had a provision. And this is how it reads. Subject to the Constitution, a person shall not produce, procure, market, broadcast, disseminate, publish, or distribute through a medium, and it goes on and on. We subjected that entire clause on advocacy. And the heading of that clause is prohibition of propaganda of, promotion of, and advocacy for activities prohibited under this act. We subjected that entire clause to the Constitution. Now, conversations have gone on, and in those conversations, and these are not private conversations, public conversations, that if you're subjecting this to the Constitution, and the reason why we introduced that phrase subject to the Constitution in that clause was to ensure that the bill had come under the accusation that it was taking away constitutional rights. And as sponsors, we had always said our bill will not and cannot, any bill that is inconsistent with the Constitution is null and void. And so there is no way that will happen. And so, Samson, if you would allow me, just there are 8 exemptions that have been done. And the reason why this was done was we said, look, today the bill is before Parliament. Sam George can be called to explain the bill and explain what the rationale behind the bill is or a clause in the bill is. Roxanne can be called and Ntim Fordjour can be called. But after Parliament passes the bill and the President assents to it, the interpretation of that bill is no longer going to be left to Sam George or any member of Parliament. It's now going to be in the bosom of a judge. And so you must make sure that if you are making provisions and exemptions, they are spelled out clearly on the face of the law. And so the subsection 2 that has been introduced says it does not apply to A, the provision of legal advice or legal representation. Samson, the most heinous crime in our country is high treason. High treason. If you are charged with high treason today, you are entitled per the Constitution to have legal representation and seek legal advice. So if a lawyer is representing a person who is standing accusation or standing trial for an offense prohibited or an act prohibited under this legislation, is that person entitled to legal advice or legal representation?
In fact, if you are accused of murder and brought before a court and you don't have a lawyer, you must be giving a lawyer by the state. Otherwise, there will not be a trial. In fact, Absolutely. If you appeared before the court and you pleaded that you are guilty, the court is enjoined by law to enter that you are not guilty so that the case will go on its merit before you are convicted.
Exactly. So if we introduce a provision that spells out clearly, because lawyers reached out, the Ghana Bar Association reached out and said, so if our members begin to give advice to persons who are standing trial for acts prohibited under this act, are they liable for promotion and advocacy? And we said no. the constitutional right to a legal representation cannot be overridden by this act. So state it clearly that the provision of legal services or legal representation is not considered advocacy. 2, submissions or representations made to a court, tribunal, parliament, commissions of inquiry, or a body exercising judicial or quasi-judicial functions. Samson, once again, you appear before the Committee of Parliament. And I told Ntim Fordjour this. In 2022 and 23, when we held the public hearings, there were pro-LGBTQ groups that appeared before Parliament to make a case against the Family Values Bill. Now, they made submissions on camera before Parliament. Would you then say that if there was another hearing of Parliament where such individuals showed up to appear before Parliament on the invitation of Parliament, or in court, a person is standing trial and one of these groups decides to enter as an interested party to make a submission before the court, should we then cause the arrest of that person as being an advocate for stating a position before a body like Parliament? Absolutely, that cannot be the case, because there are certain immunities when you appear before Parliament, for example, and give testimony before Parliament. So again, states that. So this is not a blanket exemption. It is before specific institutions. C, the publication of an academic, scientific, or medical opinion. Samson, you cannot say that, again, the right to academic opinion and expressions of same are constitutional rights. And so what we do, and there is a difference between an academic piece and the opinion of a lecturer. When you say a piece is an academic piece, we know how there's a structure for academic pieces. They are published in journals, or even if they are not published in journals, but they are published. And there's a structure to an academic piece. There's a structure to a scientific piece. It appears it must meet the criteria for a scientific journal or a medical opinion. So these are specific and regulated pieces of work. That's the third one. D, the dissemination of information by governmental body, non-governmental organization, development partner, or other bodies engaged in the delivery of health services or health-related programs. So take, for example, and I have taken the UN system on publicly for some of the activities that they undertake, which are pro-LGBTQ. And I've stated emphatically that those are not health-related activities. So if you have UNICEF, for example, carrying out an outreach, because then we received UNICEF, UNESCO saying, okay, so the health-related programs we do on tuberculosis, on early childhood diseases, where do those sit in? And we said, we don't have a problem with that. Those are health-related. But when you go out and you want to begin to talk about promotion of LGBTQ rights, that's in our jurisdiction is not considered health-related. So again, you set the exemptions within a certain parameter. The boundaries are well defined. E, the provision, and this is one of the places where Ntim Fordjour seems to have a lot of issues, the provision of medical, surgical, psychological, or counseling services in accordance with accepted professional practice. Samson, if you are providing medical services today in Ghana, those services are regulated by the Ghana Medical Association. That's the Ghana Health Service. The Ghana Medical Association and the Ghana Health Service do not allow for conversion surgeries in Ghana. And that's why, even though we speak about medical, surgical, psychological, or counseling services, it doesn't end there. It puts the framework, the boundaries. It says in accordance with accepted professional practice. So for all of these practices, you have accepted professional standards that are set not by the individual. And I said to Ntim Fordjour, he's a reverend minister. Assume that a member of his church came to him and said, Pastor, I have a challenge with homosexuality, and he offers counseling. Would he be held to be advocating for LGBTQ? But he's offering counseling. So someone is offering counseling. What is the accepted professional practice in Ghana? Per the laws of Ghana, homosexuality is frowned on. So counseling that says, look, what you are doing is not permissible by the law. You need help, find help. That counseling cannot be criminalized. And it's important to draw the distinctions there. A person who goes for medical goes for medical a medical procedure, goes to see their doctor and says, I want to have a sex change surgery. That is not acceptable professional practice in Ghana. And so if a doctor carries out that medical or surgical procedure, that doctor is in violation of the law. This is pretty clear. I really don't see where the confusion is. Then the sixth, reporting of current affairs or news by a media house or journalists in the ordinary course of journalism. And Samson, we've had several engagements. Joy has asked me, several people have asked me several times that, so if a media house reports on something touching on LGBTQ, will that journalist be held liable for advocacy? But that's why we say in the ordinary course of journalism, again, setting the boundaries. So Samson does Samson's take, for example, on a matter involving LGBTQ. That is an opinion piece. That's what Samson's take is. But in that opinion piece, does he set the boundaries as within what is ethically agreed by the Ghana Journalism of GJA as an opinion piece, as a media report? That's where we are setting the boundaries. G, the performance of public health functions, including HIV and AIDS prevention, testing, treatment, and care. That really is on the Ghana AIDS Commission. The Ghana AIDS Commission has a responsibility to treat persons who are living with HIV with antiretroviral drugs and safe sex activities. I took them on at a committee hearing and said to them that when they begin to offer lubricants and condoms to groups of men having sex with men, that goes beyond the remit of the Ghana AIDS Commission, which is to deal with HIV patients and HIV prevention. And so they must work within the parameters of what their mandate is and not go beyond that because some donor has asked. And that's what we've done. And the last one, Samson, a communication privilege under the Evidence Act. Samson, you know we have a provision in the law that says a duty to report. During the hearings, I was asked a pointed question. So if someone goes to see his medical doctor and the person is suffering from an anal tear, and the doctor finds out that it is by way of gay sex, are we imposing a liability on the doctor to report his patient? And we said no. There are privileged conversations under the Evidence Act of Ghana. A doctor-patient relationship, lawyer-client relationship, pastor-congregant relationship. Such conversations are already protected and considered privileged under the Evidence Act. So these are the provisions that we've made. We've not imported any new thing. All of these exemptions we've created, Samson, are all constitutional provisions or derived from legislation that draw their powers and strength from the Constitution.
So the feeling was that the original provision that subjected this to the Constitution did not bring sufficient clarity.
Absolutely.
Now, because this was not the subject for discussion, so to speak, I need to get one thing clear out of the way. On the 15th of February 2024, Osahe Afenyomarkin rose to ask certain questions, and that led to shelving the third reading, or aborting the third reading. He spoke about why you can't jail a person over sexuality. And the major issues he raised are almost the same thing we are talking about now. He said, among other things, that a person should not be made to face jail simply because they are offering the services that you just mentioned, including for journalists, for media, and so on. You rose and said, hell no, this must not be allowed. So what changed?
Samson, I made the point then, and I make the point now. When Osahini said people were going to be jailed for that, I said his reading of the law was wrong, and that there were exemptions in that legislation that prohibited or exempted those persons, because I said it was subject to the Constitution. So my opposition to him was that he was misreading and misinterpreting the legislation. And for the avoidance of any doubt, if we've decided that, okay, let us spell out what those exemptions are. Because I had always maintained that a journalist who was doing his journalistic work was not going to be liable for advocacy. A lawyer definitely offering services to a client in court could not have been said to be advocacy, because the Constitution enjoins that. And that's what my opposition to Afenyo-Markin at the time was. Because up till today, if you look at the principle of what I have espoused here, I still maintain, like I said then, that you do not fall foul of the law if you are doing these things, because the law exempts, or the Constitution gives you a right to do those things.
Right.
What Afenyo-Markin said was that the law would make you liable. We have once again reiterated the fact that the law does not make you liable for offering legal services, medical services, or reporting as a journalist, or any of the privileged conversations, or an academic. We have reiterated that position.
It was the lack of clarity around these questions that led the bill to be taken to a court. And you felt that was sponsored by the government then to ensure that Akufo-Addo doesn't, sign it. So this kind of clarity vindicates that the original one, as you have shown us, was bad. And this is the best approach. And yet you were against the same thing.
I haven't said the previous one was bad. But let's be clear. President Akufo-Addo had the opportunity to have written back to Parliament to ask us for clarity. What he chose to do was issue a cease and desist. And in that cease and desist letter, and I have a copy of that letter here, Samson. That letter was dated, I think it was dated from the then executive secretary. That letter was dated 18th March and says that they were aware of pending suits that were filed on the 7th of March. However, the cases only were filed on the 8th of March. So the letter actually references cases before they were even filed. And that's where there was a problem that, how is the presidency referencing a case, the case by Richard Sky and Dr. Amanda Odoi, even before the cases were filed? How did the presidency know that those cases were going to be filed at the registry of the court a day before?
All right.
So that's where the issue was. And something, President Akufo-Addo, again, had an opportunity when in December, I think, if I'm not mistaken, December 11th or 12th, the Supreme Court dispensed of all the 3 cases and gave a clear judgment. President Akufo-Addo was still president for almost 3 weeks. For 3 weeks post that, where there was no longer any legal question. The court had cleared it. He could have signed the bill.
Okay.
He chose not to.
Right.
For reasons best known to him.
So as you can see, things will take just a bit of a different turn. We will plead with you